Rome, the 10th of September, 1586. 907 men are standing in St. Peter's Square, and not one of them is allowed to make a sound. Above them hangs 83 feet of red Egyptian granite, 327 tons of it, cut near Aswan, dragged to Rome by the Emperor Caligula in the year 37, and standing untouched ever since. Pope Sixtus V has ordered absolute silence during the lift, on pain of death. 75 horses lean into their harness. 40 capstans turn. The ropes stretch and creak and begin to smoke. 900 men, 75 horses, 1 stone. Because a crane does not make a stone lighter. That was the machine at the height of its powers, and it was already 2,100 years old on the day it was doing that. But to understand why it still took 900 men, you have to go back to the moment somebody decided it shouldn't take any. Start with the ramp. For most of human history, if you wanted to put something heavy somewhere high, you did not lift it. You built a hill and dragged it up the hill. That was the Egyptian answer, and the Assyrian answer, and it worked, in the sense that the pyramids exist. It took roughly 50 men to move a 2.5-ton block up an earth ramp. 50 per stone. And the ramp itself was often a larger construction project than the building it served. A mountain of dirt and mud brick that had to be raised, maintained, and then taken away again when you were done. Picture the sound of that. Not machinery. Breathing. Hundreds of men breathing in time, and a voice calling the rhythm, and the wet grinding of sledge runners on wet sand. Now go to Corinth, sometime between 700 and 650 BC. There are temples there, at Corinth and at nearby Isthmia, built of limestone blocks weighing between 440 and 880 pounds. And on the undersides of those blocks are 2 grooves, twin channels cut into the bottom face where no one would ever see them. Archaeologists argued about those grooves for decades. Quarry marks, drag marks. Alessandro Pieratini, an architecture professor at the University of Notre Dame, went back and looked properly and published his findings in the Annual of the British School at Athens. His argument is that the grooves held ropes, that the Corinthians had a frame and passed rope under the block and over the frame, and used the redirected force to set the stone down exactly where it belonged. It is not a crane. There is no winch, no hoist, no gearing. It is the idea of a crane, about 150 years early, borrowed from shipwrights and from the business of lowering coffins into narrow graves. The real thing shows up around 515 BC, and we know because the stones tell on themselves. Suddenly, Greek temple blocks carried distinctive cuttings for lifting tongs and for Lewis irons, the iron wedge that bites into a socket and grips harder the more you pull. Tongs mean a hook means a rope means a machine. Here is the strange part. The Greeks did not invent it because they were ambitious. They invented it because they were short-handed. Egypt and Assyria had enormous pools of unskilled labor to throw at a ramp. Greek building sites didn't work that way. They ran on small teams of paid specialists, and you cannot conjure 1,000 of those out of a field. So the constraint that produced the crane was not a dream of building bigger. It was a payroll, and gravity kept its terms regardless. The block still weighed what it weighed. Nothing was subtracted from it. All that changed was how few people had to be standing underneath. Watch what happens next, because it is the opposite of what you would expect. For the next 200 years, Greek stones get smaller. The Archaic period had been chasing ever bigger monoliths. After the crane arrives, that stops cold. The Parthenon, the most famous building the ancient world produced, is made almost entirely of blocks under 15 to 20 tons, because once you have tongs and pulleys, 5 manageable stones beat one monster every single time. It was a small machine, invented by people who did not have enough hands. Then it met an empire that had all the hands in the world and wanted more anyway. The Romans took the Greek crane and turned it into a product line. We know this in unusual detail because 2 Roman engineers wrote it down. Vitruvius devotes a long passage of De Architectura to lifting machines. Heron of Alexandria covers the same ground in his Mechanica. Between them, you get something close to a catalogue. At the bottom sits the trispastos, 1 beam, 1 winch, 1 rope, 3 pulleys. A 3-to-1 advantage, which means 1 man, working steadily, raises about 330 pounds. Above that, the pentaspastos, with 5 pulleys. And at the top, the polyspastos, 3 ropes running over 5 pulleys, with 4 men on each side of the winch, 6,600 pounds. Then somebody replaces the winch with a wheel. Not a wheel you turn, a wheel you walk inside. Put a man in a large drum and let him climb the inside of it forever, and the diameter of that drum becomes your leverage. The polyspastos with a treadwheel doubled its capacity to 13,200 pounds and did it with half the crew. 2 men in a wheel now beat 50 men on a ramp by a factor of 60 per person. The pull just got longer. That was the whole trade. To raise the load 1 foot, somebody walks a great deal further than 1 foot, and the machine quietly converts that patience into force. The Romans were not embarrassed about this. The Heteri family, who appear to have been contractors, had a treadwheel crane carved onto their tomb in the late 1st century, complete with the little figures still climbing inside the wheel. It is a gravestone with a machine on it. They wanted you to know what they did for a living, and they went further than any single crane could go. At the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, the architrave blocks run up to 60 tons each, and the cornices weigh more than 100, all of it raised about 62 feet into the air. In Rome, the capital block of Trajan's column weighs 53.3 tons and sits 112 feet up. No crane on the Vitruvius list can do that. Those were lifting towers, timber trestles built around the load, ringed by capstans on the ground, hauled by men and animals turning in circles. Remember the tower, it comes back. The Romans wrote the manual. Then the West stopped reading it, and for roughly 700 years there is no crane in the record at all. Not banned, not feared, just gone, along with the empire that paid for it. The word reappears in French archives around 1225. Magna Rota, the Great Wheel. An illuminated manuscript shows one about 1240. Then the harbours light up one by one. Utrecht in 1244, Antwerp in 1263, Bruges in 1288, Hamburg in 1291. England doesn't record a treadwheel before 1331, and the machine that came back was, by our standards, terrifying. Medieval cranes rarely had brakes, not because nobody thought of it, because the friction inside a wooden treadwheel was considered brake enough, and mostly it was. The whole safety system was that the thing was too badly made to run away. They also could not swing. The crane went straight up and nothing else, so the load was steered by a crane master standing outside, shouting at men sealed in a drum, tugging the stone into place with a hand rope. Then there is where they lived. Cranes were not perched on medieval scaffolding, which could never have held them. They were assembled on the ground, often inside the church itself. When a floor was finished and the roof beams tied the walls together, the crane was taken apart and rebuilt up there, and moved from bay to bay as the vaults closed over it. The machine grew with the building. It climbed as the church climbed, which is why, today, every surviving construction crane in England is sitting in a church tower, above the vaulting, below the roof. Nobody ever brought them down. Physics does not give discounts. It only gives receipts, and the receipt was paid in legs. Not everyone was convinced. Italy's ports, the most sophisticated in Europe, refused the dockside crane and went on unloading by ramp for centuries. Even in the north, the machine never won outright. Ladders, hods, and handbarrows kept working right alongside it. So by 1585, Europe could raise a cathedral 300 feet into the sky. It could not stand up one Egyptian stone lying in a Roman churchyard. A pope decided that was going to change. Domenico Fontana was born in 1543 in Melide, on a lake in what is now Switzerland. He trained as a stonemason. He came to Rome around 1563, and in 1585, Sixtus V made him papal architect, which meant that when the Pope decided the Vatican obelisk should stand at the center of the new St. Peter's, it became Fontana's problem. The obelisk had not moved since Caligula. Europe had genuinely forgotten how such things were done. Fontana's answer was to go back to Vitruvius and build the Roman lifting tower, a timber castle around the stone, ringed by capstans. The lowering came first, between the 30th of April and the 7th of May, 1586. Hemp rope and iron bars weighing 40,000 pounds. The obelisk came down onto a cradle, and the cradle went onto rollers, and the whole thing crept a quarter of a mile across the piazza over the following months. 5 months, start to finish. Then, the 10th of September, the raising. Silence, on pain of death. 907 workers, 75 horses, 40 capstans, 5 great levers, hundreds of privileged spectators watching from the ramparts and from the roof of St. Peter's, and the Pope's guards watching the spectators. The reason for the silence was not reverence. It was that 900 people had to hear one voice, and every capstan had to turn on the same beat, or the tower would rack and the stone would come down and take the square with it. And this is where Rome's favorite story lives. The account has been repeated for 400 years. As the obelisk rose, the ropes stretched under the load and began to fray, and a Genoese sailor named Benedetto Brescia broke the silence to shout, "Acqua alle funi," water on the ropes. The hemp was soaked, it shrank, it tightened, and the lift was saved. Historians treat that as legend rather than record. The tale a city tells about itself. Take it as Rome's story, not as evidence. What is not in doubt, the obelisk went up at sunset on the 10th of September, 1586, with no accident of any kind, and the population of Rome carried Domenico Fontana through the streets. Then he did the stranger thing. He wrote it down. Every stage, 38 full-page engravings, published in 1590, and Bartolomeo Grassi had already been selling prints of the operation on the street in August, while the stone was still lying on its rollers, unfinished. The obelisk is still standing exactly where Fontana left it, but what he actually changed was not in the piazza. It was in the book, because for the first time the machine came with instructions anyone could buy. Now watch the crowd disappear. William George Armstrong was born in Newcastle in 1810 and became a solicitor, which he hated. On a walking trip, he saw a water wheel powering a marble quarry and could not stop thinking that almost all of the available power was being thrown away. In December 1845, he brought a model of a hydraulic crane to Newcastle's Literary and Philosophical Society. In 1846, he talked the town council into letting him convert a single crane on the quayside, running it on the pressure already sitting in the town's ordinary water mains. Coal barges emptied by a machine plumbed into the tap. It worked. He got a 10-year contract to convert the rest and exclusive rights to erect new ones. He quit the law. The Elswick Works opened in 1847, 45 cranes in 1850, 75 by 1852. Then a job at the New Holland ferry station on the Humber had no mains at all and no good ground for a reservoir. So in 1850, Armstrong invented the accumulator, a loaded piston in a cylinder holding water at 600 pounds per square inch, so crane power could now exist anywhere. Grimsby Dock Tower, finished on the 27th of March, 1852, is 30,000 gallons held 200 feet in the air, and it is nothing but that idea made visible. Edward Bazand Ellington took it to the conclusion. From September 1883, the London Hydraulic Power Company sold crane power through cast iron mains under the streets at £700 per square inch metered to anyone who wanted it. Power as a utility, 4 years before electricity was sold the same way. Remember those pipes? Then, July 1957, Matson Navigation commissions a study and finds that no crane on Earth can handle a fully loaded shipping container. So the Pacific Coast Engineering Company in Alameda, California, under C. Dean Ramsden, builds one, all welded box girders, that clean A-frame silhouette you now see in every port on the planet. It went into service on the 7th of January, 1959. A longshore gang moved about 9 tons an hour. The crane moved a 40,000-pound box every 3 minutes, 400 tons an hour. Ship turnaround went from 3 weeks to 18 hours. The ton was still a ton. It simply passed through fewer hands. San Francisco's port director thought containers were a fad and would not build a terminal for them. So the crane went to a small city across the bay, and the trade followed the crane, and San Francisco's waterfront never came back. 900 men in 1586, 1 man in a glass box in 1959, and the machine was only getting started. Go to Yantai, in Shandong province, and look at Taisun, 436 feet tall, a span of 394 feet, wider than a soccer field. 31 miles of wire rope threaded through it. On the 18th of April 2008, Taisun lifted a water-ballasted barge weighing 20,133 metric tons, over 44 million pounds, in one piece. That is roughly 61 Vatican obelisks going up at once, in a yard where nobody had to be quiet. But that is just scale. Here is the part nobody sees coming. Go back under London. The crane mains never went away. The London Hydraulic Power Company pumped its last on the 30th of June 1977, the end of the last public hydraulic power network on Earth, and it left behind up to 186 miles of Victorian cast iron pipe under central London. Dead pipe, worthless, except for one thing nobody had noticed. As a statutory utility, that crane company held a parliamentary right to dig up London's public highways whenever it liked. That right did not expire when the pump stopped. Rothschilds bought the company in 1981. In 1985, Mercury Communications, the outfit set up to break British Telecom's monopoly, bought the whole thing, not for the water, for the hole in the road. Fiber optic cable has been running through those pipes ever since. When your data crosses central London, some of it is travelling through iron laid in the 1880s to haul coal out of barges. The history of the crane is not the history of construction. It is the history of the pipe under the road, the box on the ship, and the empty dock. A machine invented because a few Greek builders could not afford enough hands ended up deciding which cities got rich and where the internet goes. It started as 2 grooves cut into the bottom of a Corinthian limestone block where nobody was meant to look. It made Greek stones smaller instead of bigger. It put 2 Romans in a wooden wheel and beat 50 Egyptians on a ramp. It died with an empire and came back 700 years later as a drum in a cathedral tower, where some of them are still sitting. It stood an obelisk up at sunset and got a book written about it. It ran on Newcastle tap water. It sold power by the meter under London. And then it emptied the docks it had been built to fill. We opened on 907 men and 75 horses and called that the machine at the height of its powers. It wasn't. It was the machine at the end of something. That square full of silent people was the last age in which lifting anything still required a multitude. And the silence was not awe. It was 900 people straining to hear one voice. A crane does not make a stone lighter. It never has. Gravity has never given anyone a discount, and the granite in St. Peter's Square weighs today exactly what it weighed in Egypt 4,000 years ago. Every ounce of it still has to be carried, every inch of the way up, by something. What the crane made lighter was the crowd. If you enjoyed this one, a like genuinely helps. And tell me in the comments which part got you. The fiber optic cables running through Victorian crane pipes, or the fact that inventing the crane made the Parthenon stones smaller.